My specialty is $15 to $25. That's where most wine is, particularly now during COVID. There's so many wines coming in at that price range. The way we taste is not like the spectator or the way the wine enthusiast might taste. I'm the guy that's going into the wine shop with you or into the supermarket, and I see $20 Cabernets, but I've tasted them all. And I can tell you that this one's really worth $40 based on the other things that are $40. And the one over here is really like 10. And there's a lot of those. And our job is to weed those out.
Yeah, so you kiss a lot of Venus frogs to find the princely bottles. So what would you say is your sort of ratio for tasting, like rejects, like I taste 10 and I pick one or whatever? I know it'll vary, but on average, how many are you tasting versus how many do you offer to your wine club members?
If I taste 300 wines in a month, I will probably reject 250 of them.
Wow, most. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 124. Which regions, grapes, and styles are undervalued and worth trying? Should you be skeptical of celebrity-endorsed wines? How can you choose a good wine club? And what simple strategy can you use to improve your tasting vocabulary? Our guest this week has answers for you, plus lots of great wine tips and stories. And I've got a bonus for you in addition to this podcast. I'd love for you to join me for the premiere watch party of the video of this conversation that I'll be live streaming for the very first time on Zoom, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll include a link where you can sign up for this Zoom tasting and future Zoom tastings and chats for free in the show notes at nataliemclain.com/124. The video will show you the pictures and other visual elements that we discuss in the podcast. I'll also be jumping into the comments on all 4 platforms as we watch it together, so I can answer your questions in real time. It's like the Netflix version of the podcast, plus you can talk to me and ask me questions as we watch it together. You can also see what other people thought of this conversation and get the answers to their questions. Plus, you can win a personally signed copy of Rex Pickett's novel Sideways, which was made into the hit movie, as well as a bottle of Sideways Pinot Noir. All you need to do is comment on the social media post that I create about the contest. Just pick your favorite platform, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and comment on the post I created before 7 p.m. on April 21st. In the show notes, you'll find a link to these posts, a full transcript of our conversation, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find me on Zoom, Insta, Facebook, and YouTube, live on video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclain.com/124. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show, Mom shared a story with me from when I was about 1.5 years old. She used to take me for walks in my stroller every day, and we followed the same route often that passed by a small toy store. In the window was a little plastic dog on wheels, and I'd point to it every time, and we'd stop and we'd look at it. And so for Christmas that year, she got me that little dog, but apparently I didn't play with it much. I wasn't even interested in it. However, on our next walk, as we were approaching the store, I started pointing at the window and looking at her. She says, puzzled, disappointed. Apparently, I wanted that doggy in the window to stay right where he was. You know, this really reminds me now of the difference between wanting and getting, whether it's a vacation, shoes, or wine. Sometimes the wanting or the anticipation is better than the getting and having it, What do you think? Let me know. Okay, on with the show. Paul Kay is the host of Wine Talks with Paul Kay, which he interviews wine industry royalty and Michelin-starred chefs. He also is the owner of the Original Wine of the Month Club, which sends wines directly to consumers all over the United States. His expertise spans 30 years, and it was actually his father who came up with the idea of sending wine through the mail back in 1972. And I'm so pleased you're here with us this evening, Paul. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be on the show.
All right, great. Great background. I was just commenting on that before we got going. Is this your studio or is this your home? Where are you joining us from?
Well, we have a studio here at the office. We're in Southern California, and we're working with this lighted sign, which is not lit right now. The technical difficulties, of course, but we're actually going to do something kind of cool. We're going to paint back here in black and white what was my father's store.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. That's a storefront.
Yes, and it'll be, so you'll be like kind of new with color. I'll be in color, but the store will be black and white, like it's vintage.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
What's old is new again.
Right.
All right. So, Paul, let's just kick it off before we get into wine of the month and different wines to try that we should be looking for. Tell us a little bit from your wine career. Maybe take us kind of to the lowest moment of your career, and then we'll go to happy endings, the highest point so far. So, can you recall a situation, anything that's happened in your career wine-wise that was kind of a bit of a low point, or maybe something you learned from?
Well, gee, it's a wine business. That can't be that many low points, right? I mean, this is a pretty fun business to be in. I had a conversation with Eric Asimov, the New York Times wine critic. And he's like, anybody that tells you you're in a bad business when you do what we do every day is lying. So,
Right.
But there are a couple of interesting events that occurred in my business because we're such a monthly cycle, and every monthly we're doing the same thing over and over again. We're trying to find good wines and make sure they get delivered on time. And I got a wine from Italy, a Montepulciano, and it landed here. You're a pretty reputable guy. He's a Frenchman who brings wines from all over the world, and I let him just land the wine, and they took off the truck, and I brought it in, and I stuck a corkscrew in it, and it released gas. Now, you and I know that a red wine should not release gas.
Nope, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, particularly if it smells like eggs.
Oh.
So that was a huge problem. I had 400 cases, almost 5,000 bottles of this completely horrible wine. I don't know I've never had it since. I've never had a problem like that. I've never tasted a wine with the same problem.
Was it sulfur dioxide?
It must have been sulfur dioxide, but I don't know. You remember that time in wine, there was this whole rumor that the Italians were putting antifreeze in their wines and sending it to America. And
I thought that was the Austrians, no?
Well,
it was the Italians too.
I don't know. But
mixing the batch or enlarging the batch, if you will.
Yes, It was bad. So, my problem is with a monthly cycle, and I can't be late a day or two or else I'm in big trouble. So I had to call the rep, and it's happened twice over the years, once with American wine too. That was low. I could tell you what, that was low.
All right. You're right, though. There aren't a lot of low points in this business. So take us to a highlight for you, something that has stood out so far in your mind, wine related.
What I like about our business and how we can help people understand the value of great wine and a great bottle and a great glass and a great moment. So our governor's famous for head to the French Laundry in Napa during COVID, right? And oddly, we had just been there. And it's really expensive. It's a really expensive restaurant.
It is one of the most expensive in the whole States, but also it's also been named the best restaurant in the States. So I guess you get what you pay for.
Well, if you can't afford it and you want to splurge and you're in Napa, it's a must thing to do. Used to be impossible to get a reservation. But anyway, during COVID, it was a little easier. All of our seats were outside, though the governor decided to get the room inside, which my wife wanted to do, which was $800 a seat. So those rumors are true.
Gosh. Wow.
It's very expensive, and particularly during COVID, to get an interior room. But anyway, the point was we were with two other couples, good friends of ours, just built themselves nice wine cellars, and they just had nothing else but Napa Cabernet, which is a gorgeous wine, and they're wonderful to experiment and to taste. But that's all they could break out. They couldn't break out of this scenario. So I asked the Somm for a Burgundy, a Côte de Nuit, something Grand Cru, something around $400 a bottle. I know it's really expensive. And he brought this gorgeous Chambel Musigny, and our friends flipped over it. And the reason I call that a great moment is because from that moment on, as we've been getting together the last months, we've been able to try new things, particularly Burgundies now that they experienced them, but Super Tuscans and wines from the south of Italy and wines from other parts of France have been great experience for me to take it to the next level for them. That's what's good for me.
That's great. So you got them out of their rut. And so, how do you advise those of us who are here with us tonight or on the podcast? How do they get out of their rut when you're going back to the same old wine all the time? What are your tips other than just get out of it? But are there any?
Yeah, well, that is a good question. It's not easy because if you did what I do, which is around 300 wines a month, it would be very expensive and you would taste a lot of really bad stuff along the way. And you want to try and avoid that. And so you want to taste things that are considered by some people, whether, a rating, which we can talk about that too in a minute, but that's respected. So let's say we're talking about Nero d'Avola from Sicily. We want to make sure that it's considered a decent one so that when we taste it, we can determine whether we like it or whether our palate is suited for it. So you need a good quality curator. Your local wine shop, who learns your palate as you go in and out, can help you, guide you, because there's so many varieties and so many different grapes and parts of the world to experience wine from that it's hard to say, go to Groupon and buy something for $3 and see if you like it, because you really don't know if it's any good in the first place. And that's the problem.
Right. Yeah. In Canada, we don't have Groupon available to us, but there's still lots of options. There's wine clubs and there's buying directly from the winery and so on. But definitely we have lots of American listeners. And so I guess that's one way to get out of your rut. But before we move on to some other tips, what do you think you'd be doing if you weren't running this wine club and making the podcast? Is there something else you'd do?
I'm still stuck on you don't have Groupon in Canada. That part of
Well, we have discounts, but we don't get wine offers because the provinces legislate so much.
Yes,
like
they
it's
do, yeah.
only the LCBO, which is the biggest purchaser of wine in the world, that can basically sell wine. There's a few exceptions, but we don't get the sort of Groupon deals like you might. But we do have wine clubs. So
It's funny, the state of Pennsylvania was the largest retailer of wine in America. Now that they've opened their doors, their channels to allow wineries to ship there, it's changed a little bit, but the government intervention is a problem. I'd actually tried to ship something to Ontario, I think, or was it Montreal? I can't remember, but it got stuck at the LCBO and they had a 100% tariff. So we had it picked up and brought it back.
Yep. A lot of tax and a lot of regulation. So I know a lot of wine lovers are hoping for that to privatize.
Well, yes, you asked me what I would be doing.
Yeah.
I don't know. No. What has happened now, particularly in this industry and not in most industries, is that media has become quite an important part of any marketing effort. Anything to do with social networking or internet marketing or SEO is media. And I've always wanted to create. I get fascinated by it. I'm a frustrated cinema student from USC. I got in, but I never went. I went to business school, and I've sort of regretted that just because I would have loved the creation part of it. But I'm enjoying thinking through ideas to get people to try wine, to be interested in wine, to be inspired by wine, and using media to do that. I think I don't know, maybe I'll just do this permanently. I got a big enough studio anyway, so I got a fancy studio.
You got a serious studio.
Yeah, that's right.
We share that, Paul. I did an MBA, but I didn't have the confidence to write. But now it's the joy of my life, creating and podcast or whatever. So in terms of the wines you've sold, just some highlights. What's been the most expensive wine you ever sold through the club?
I sold a DRC, a Romani Conti. It was a Richebourg, 2007. I think I charged them $2,500.
25, that's a deal.
Yeah. Well, It was a few years ago.
Wow.
I have 4 more bottles, and I have some Latache. Those are around $5,000. Well, I had a customer buy $13,000 worth of Burgundy a few weeks ago for 28 bottles.
That's amazing.
That's a pretty good order. But, that took some work. He was looking to round out his cellar, and he had a beautiful cellar. He invited me to go see it. Biometric entrance. You put your thumb against the pad there. And mostly Napa Cabs and First Growth Bordeaux. And I was like, I don't know where I can help you. You have things I probably can't even get. I said, but you don't have good Burgundy, and let me help you with that. So I did a lot of research, and he's very happy with that part of his cellar now. My specialty is $15 to $25, and that's where most wine is, particularly now during COVID. There's so many wines coming in at that price range. The way we taste is not like what the Spectator or the way James Suckling might taste or the way the wine enthusiast might taste. I'm the guy that's going into like the wine shop with you or into the supermarket and I see 20 $20 Cabernets. But I've tasted them all, and I can tell you that this one's really worth $40 based on the other things that are $40, and the one over here is really like 10. And there's a lot of those, and our job is to weed those out.
Yeah, so you kiss a lot of Venus frogs to find the princely bottles. So what would you say is your sort of ratio for tasting, like rejects, like I taste 10 and I pick one or whatever? I know it'll vary, but on average, how many are you tasting versus how many do you offer to your wine club members?
Well, I don't even remember what I buy now. I think I buy about 20 different wines because I have a Napa club, a Bordeaux club, I have a sweet, a rosé, etc.
Okay.
But if I taste 300 wines in a month, I will probably reject 270 of them. No, 250 of them.
Wow, most.
And I reject them for a variety of reasons. And this is kind of colloquial because my father had a 3-point system when he started tasting wine in the 70s. And that was 1, can't use it. So my vendors think when they see a 1 on my computer, because I log everything, that they got a 1. That's like a good
Oh,
thing, but
score.
it's not so bad. It's actually the worst thing again. 2 means I think I could use it the way it is for the price and what it is and what it's trying to be. That's a good wine. And 3 is the wine was very good, but just overpriced for what it is. And if the price came down to where I think it's more valuable, then it becomes a good wine. So that's what we do. It's very interesting because any way you can buy wine in America, I've done it. We've bought grapes, we've crushed them, we brought 20,000 liter Tetra tanks in from Argentina and bottled at Napa, all those kinds of things.
Okay.
If a vendor is a legitimate distributor of wine who actually curates their own book, the rejection rate is much lower because they've already been through the process. But I have a lot of bottom fishing brokers that go around the country and the world and find odd lots of odd things, and they find some really good values once in a while, but the rejection rate is much higher because they just don't care. They just, hey, maybe Paul will like it. It's like the Life cereal commercial. Hey, Paul likes it.
Because sometimes I think wine clubs get a reputation, other wine clubs, of course, as a dumping ground for bad wines. It's like in the Caribbean, I think all the bad vintages go there to die in Caribbean vintages in restaurants.
How interesting.
If you're a consumer looking for a good wine club, how do you know that you're not getting offloaded some stuff that was just the buyer happened to get a great deal? It's not a great wine.
You don't.
You don't? Okay.
Like I said, it goes back to like trusting the wine buyer if you go to the supermarket and buy wine, which I'm not sure in Canada you can do that. I got yelled at in Montreal when I was a teenager trying to buy beer. So
we can
on
now.
a Sunday. So,
limited amounts we can go to a grocery store.
I think she yelled at me in French too.
Oh, really?
The way wine works is sort of disillusioning for a lot of people because so much of wine is just farmers. Most wineries are really just farmers. They're just growing grapes. They sell the grapes to somebody else. A very small percentage of wine is actually bottled by the grower, estate bottling. So our vision as a consumer of a winery like Napa, and there's a big chateau and the French chateau is the smallest percentage of the real thing of wine. And if you make a wine and it's not very good, you can make a mistake. You can't make good wine from bad grapes. If you make bad wine from good grapes, it goes somewhere. It ends up somewhere. Somebody's going to bottle it. Somebody's going to sell it to another winery to blend with something else that's maybe better and try to just move through it. It's just the way the business is. And so you need to trust the purveyor of the wines. And it doesn't really matter if you get the end of a vintage. It may be even better. In fact, years ago, Napa had a great year. 1990 was like a great year. Bordeaux had a great year. 89 was a little tough. Well, no, I'm sorry. Back to Napa. 90 was great. 89s were tough. So the 90s came out before the 89s. And so now the winery can't bring back the 89 because the 90s are already on the shelf. But they've got pallets of these wines sitting in their warehouse. So the 89 started to come around. After a few years, they're really good. And there were some great deals to be had. So you might call that a bin end or a closeout or something. It probably was, but the wine was really good. So I don't have a problem with the timing of certain things. It's that the wine has been properly curated and determined to be a good example of what it's supposed to be. That's really the key.
Right. And when you're tasting, what are tasting tips you can pass on to those who are listening or watching right now? You've developed a palate, you know what you're looking for on that 1, 2, or 3 scale, but What else are you looking for when you taste?
Well, the primary is, the three pieces of a taste. It's the beginning, the middle, and the end. How about that? Sounds like a great story, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
I read a book. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. I looked for varietally correct exposure to those three pieces. So
What does that mean, varietally correct for
varietally
you?
correct means if it's Cabernet, do we have the cassis? Do we have the spice? Do we have the firm acids in the back? If it's Merlot, is it more approachable? They're a little bit more black cherry, those kinds of characters. And I think the question that you're asking me is more like, well, how do I know what black cherry tastes like? Or how do I know, when somebody says it smells like herbs? That's what you do. If you're cooking and you're squishing rosemary in your hands, smell your fingers. If you take a bite of an apple, smell the apple. If you're working with eggs, take a moment to savor that egg, because the memory of smell is like one of the most memorable things you have. It's that sense is very time insensitive. In fact, we were in Paris a few years ago, and we went to the local view of the Eiffel Tower, the local tourist restaurant, and they served the quiche. And it took me back like 45 or 50 years. My mom made the same quiche, and I had the same ingredients. And I told my wife, I said, I can't believe what the smell is, how far it's taking me back.
Like Proust's Madeleine or even Ratatouille, and he goes
Yeah,
right back.
exactly.
The critic goes back. Yeah.
So that's
great.
exactly right. The Ratatouille moment. So it's all about just experiencing and taking a minute to use your senses during everyday things, mowing the lawn if you do that kind of thing, pruning the bushes. Like I said, when you're cooking for particular fruit senses, bite the apple and sort of go, gee, what am I tasting? The green apples taste different than Fuji apples. And that's how you start to develop a vocabulary for this.
Absolutely. I also tell my online course students, like, do exactly what you're suggesting because you'll develop that vocabulary. And now that I'm writing my third book, which is a memoir, the way I access my memories is to remember first, what did it smell like? And then everything else comes back. I just close my eyes. I'm not trying to remember what did it look like. What did it smell like first? And not even just wine, but the whole situation.
There's the aroma. Have you heard of the aroma wheel?
Yes, by Ann Noble, UC Davis professor. Yeah.
Right. So she sold it to Isabelle Lechèvre, and she's back doing it, and she's refining it, and she's creating courses around it. And I had forgotten about it. I remember I was going to try and copy it 10 years ago. But I've told this to Isabel. I said, gee, I was thinking about just copying it and just copyright infringement. But it's a great tool. It's a great tool because it sort of allows the basic component to come out. And then, oh, yeah, I really sense this. And then the last most granular ring.
Exactly. Because for those who are not familiar, it starts with broad categories like flowers or wood or whatever. And then it'll go deeper and deeper, like violets and, wet stems of those violets or whatever. Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea. Not the copyright infringement, but
No, yeah,
no,
right.
let's not do that. What's the weirdest or most obscure wine you've ever sold?
It's funny you ask that question. And I've been talking about this for the last week. It was recently. It was 2 weeks ago. Tasting somebody brought me, and I brought it in for myself. It's not on my website yet. It's from the Canary Islands.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and when I log on my computer what I'm tasting, I do that every Tuesday. I put in the vintage, the date, I put everything in there, the grape. And if the grape's already been tasted, which you can't imagine after 30 years that there's not a grape in there haven't tasted, but I start typing in Lisbon Negro, and it didn't come up, which means I'd never tasted a wine from that grape. And of course, Canary Islands had never come up before. And because of its volcanic soil, it's fabulous wine. And I
Really?
kind of love volcanic soil wines anyway, not to be
Why?
wine
What does
geeky.
the volcanic soil do for that wine?
You really understand the minerality, and you get a little bit, it's not smoke, but there's a little bit of ash in there. They're a little leaner. They don't get so voluptuous because the water flows through them. It doesn't accumulate and clog
Great
up.
drainage, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
got
So
great
they have to
drainage.
suffer.
And so wines from Puglia around the base of the mountain down there have that same character. But Canary Islands, who would have known? Right?
Wow, that is amazing.
Isn't that fun?
Where's Canary Islands, roughly,
I don't know.
geographically? Oh, okay. Oh, we'll ask the Canary Islands Wine Council. Do you know anything more about their wine? Like how much wine they make? Or I guess that's probably the lead grape.
That's a good question, though. When I taste a wine like that, I usually will go right to Google Earth or something, and I'll start looking at it just to understand it. I didn't have time that day from the vendor, and the wine just came in on Friday. So I'm going to Probably have to do my homework now.
Dig into it. Yeah, you've made me curious now, too. So is there anything that stands out for you, like a kind of a strange or unusual situation when you've been out either researching or trying to buy wines or anything related to the wine club or just wine generally?
Well, it's kind of fun, and things have changed a lot in the wine business through COVID. I mean, a lot. We used to go to big trade tastings, and when I do 300 a month, it used to be 100 or 200 off premise at some other venue.
Off-premise meaning, sorry.
Let's say the local distributor Wine Warehouse was having their annual tasting. They do it
Okay.
twice a year.
Right.
And there's a whole bunch of retailers, a whole bunch of distributors in Los Angeles. These things would be going on all the time. At least twice a month, I'd be out of the office tasting somewhere else. COVID stopped all that, of course. And so now those 300 wines a month and more are coming through the door here. So it's a lot of work. But back in the old days, and I always found this fascinating. Back in the old days, and I hate to date myself because it's not that old, but I'm talking about the late 80s. When you would go to a big tasting and there'd be 1,000 wines, there'd be 100 tables, 10 wines each. You'd never do them all, right? But people like Fess Parker would be pouring his wine, Daniel Boone.
California winemaker. Yep.
Pat Paulson, the great comedian, would be pouring his own wines. Dick Sanford, became an icon in the world of Santa Barbara wines, pouring his own wines. Dickie Smothers, the great comedian, part of half the team of the Smothers Brothers, pouring his own wines. The point of that is they weren't celebrities then. They were celebrities in their public persona, but in the wine world, they were winemakers and winery owners. And they were completely approachable without any pretense. We're talking wine here. We're not talking about my celebrity status. And that was always really fun. Just talking to them about wine and like Pat Paulson had a wine called Refrigerator White. It's like, what?
I love it.
It's like, what is this? Of course, their IRS took his winery, but whatever.
Okay, well, too bad for that. Emptied the fridge.
Right,
So you've
exactly.
met all of these folks back in the day when they were pouring. How has it changed with today's celebrity-endorsed or named wines?
That's a really good segue. Those guys were winery owners. Like I said, Pat Paulson's was absorbed by the IRS. He had to own it to take it, right? Fess Parker became a huge enterprise in Santa Barbara. The Smothers Brothers, I believe they're still around. I'm not sure about their wines. I haven't seen them lately. Dick Sanford, of course, he sold the winery. Those were real people making real wine, real investment in the wine. I haven't seen that except for Greg Norman's wines in the celebrity world. So typically, I'm going to come out and say it, they don't typically work because you're just paying a percentage off the top for the celebrity status. What is the value of, well, I'll take the most obscure example. Big Ange, the sort of verbose woman that was in one of the Housewives of Atlanta. She had a whole line of sparkling Moscatos. They were horrible.
Oh.
And nobody really cared.
They just wanted the name on the bottle just for whatever, a gag gift or whatever bottle.
Years ago, I won the right to be the Professional Golf Association wine club. Long story why it never came to fruition, but at that time, there were 16 golfers, professional golfers who had wines.
Yeah.
Fred Couples had
Ernie Els and
yeah, they
Fred
all had wines, right?
Arnold
Only a couple
Palmer.
left.
Yeah.
But Arnold Palmer had nothing to do with it, right? It was just his name. Greg Norman has something to do with it. None of those brands exist anymore. And so it seems the only ones that have worked is Mirabelle, which is Brad Pitt.
Angelina Jolie. Did one or the other of them take custody of the wine? Because
that's a good question. I haven't read about it.
Yeah,
they did split up. I haven't heard about what happened to the wine.
But, I think to your point, that is a great wine, but it's made by the people who do Chateau, what is it? Beaucastel in the Rhone Valley.
Chateau Beaucastel, yeah.
Serious winemakers behind the label.
Yeah, that's real winemaking.
And they don't have their names on it, the label. Like
right.
Brangelina is not on the label anywhere. Yeah.
That is one difference. Now, I'll highlight Snoop Dogg's in the wine business now. And we were at the market here locally, and the first time I saw it, it's called Cali Red. I think it's made by the guys that do the 19 Criminals. But it was right at eye level in the middle shelf of the wine at the supermarket. Okay? So best spot you could have. And that means it's been paid for. It's like toothpaste for Procter & Gamble, right? It's not free. So I guess old Snoop Dogg wasn't doing so well because the next time we went in about a month later, it was in the bottom shelf. So
he's in the doghouse. He's heading down.
Yeah, and the dog. That's right. He's in the doghouse. Okay, that's funny. I like that. but that shows you that I personally think And I brought this example up before. If I'm spending $50 on a bottle of wine or 40 or 20 or 10, and I know what I like, why would I buy that version of it because Fred Couples' name is on it? I don't understand that. If I'm a real wine drinker and I really enjoy what I do, what value does that bring to the bottle?
Absolutely. And as I tell my students, the first sale might be based on the label, but the second sale is always based on what's inside. So
That's correct.
fool me once or whatever.
I don't know. Did you read the article? I had Punch Drink, which is a great online blog for anything alcohol, and she sat with me for 3 hours and watched me taste. And during the tasting, there was a break in the action, so I had a bunch of samples that were sent to me. Oddly and weirdly, a competitor sent some of their wines for me to buy, and one of them was a Beaujolais, 2016. This is about 2 years ago, so it was current vintage. I said, let's taste this. It'll be fun. So we opened it up, and it's really quite bad. We couldn't drink it. And she goes, this is really horrible. I said, yeah, and I rolled the label over, and the wine was from Saturday Night Live, the TV show.
Oh, okay.
I'm thinking to myself, some poor person who loves Saturday Night Live, who saw this bottle somewhere or saw an ad for it, thought, I'll drink, Saturday Night Live Beaujolais while I'm watching the show. And there's just no way you could have gone, this is really good. Just, you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, those
what do you
gag
do with
names
that?
and endorsements only go so far. So, sort of conversely, what do you think are the most undervalued regions and grapes and styles that we all should be trying right now?
Well, the Canary Islands. No.
Yes, if we can get it or find it, if we know where the heck it is in the world. But yes, Canary Islands, sure.
It's funny. Right now, the industry's in a weird position. There's a lot of great wines, and they're very inexpensive. So you can find good values just about anywhere, because what COVID did was, if you and I started a winery tomorrow, we would want to go to a restaurant for the sales, because we get our name on the list and they just keep buying. We don't have to go there again because it's printed on the list. And so it's like a permanent salesman. All that got dried up for 9 months. No restaurants were buying anything. So there's a lot of great wines coming out of the woodwork. So some of the wines that you like typically are going to be less money. And if you have somebody you trust to point you in the right direction, there'll be a lot of really good values. Regionally, though, still the Chilean, Argentinian things are really good values. There's some really fun things coming out of there. Australia's back in the game a little bit. They've come to our shores again. They sort of ebb and flow through over the years. Sometimes their prices go out and then they don't come back for a little while, but they're kind of coming back into the fray. There's some Caucasus wines that are very interesting. I'm Armenian descent. I have a little bit of a bent toward them, but when they became free, the technology showed up at their doorstep, and there are some pretty bright winemakers. Michel Rolland's been out there. Paul Hobbs has been out there.
Famous flying winemakers, yeah.
Yeah, right.
To
So
consult,
they've been around.
yeah.
They've been around doing this stuff. So they're hard to find. They're reasonable, though. Unfortunately, during the Artsakh War, a friend of mine's winery was just commandeered by the soldiers, and he had a great wine called Abris. It was made from a grape called Sireni, which we don't grow here. It was like $15, but it was Class A wine made from a real winemaker with quality equipment. So, but I would Chile and Argentina is just the go-to value. There's some great values, really good values.
Is that because the cost of production is lower, natural conditions are better, all of those contributing factors?
All those things together, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just less money to do. Well, I had this conversation with an Armenian winemaker, for instance. I think Cabernet grapes, premium Cabernet grapes in 2018 were $8,000 a ton. Okay. So that puts like $125 worth of juice in each bottle, just for the juice, not the glass, not the cork, not anything. And you can buy grapes in most countries like that for like $500 a ton. So you can see this is a considerably less money, just the costs. Yeah.
Wow. And with Armenian wines, do they share any similarities with Georgian wines, which are really in vogue now with the Qveveri and the orange wines and the ancient winemaking methods?
Actually, they're not as tuned to that. I think part of it's because when the Soviets were running the show, they had told the Armenians, you're making the brandy. And that's why Winston Churchill loved Armenian brandy. And the Georgians were told to make the wine. That's basically what the rules were. So the Armenians didn't have a chance to cultivate, to see the age of their vines grow, to get the benefit of old grapes, old vine grapes. So they didn't have these interesting techniques like the Georgians do. There's no quality difference, but they're totally different. Sireni and not any of the main red grapes, they make them more, I can't even, this is what's cool about wine. I can't even reference another grape that I taste, maybe Sangiovese to a little, like a Sangiovese Syrah blend, which is kind of weird, right? To equate the regular indigenous red wines from Armenia. The Georgian wines are heavy and robust, and they've used the micro-oxidation going through, in those amphora underground. It's a totally different process.
Yeah. What is your opinion, just segueing into that, on Georgian wines and orange wines and, I don't know, those that are in amphorae and pet nat and all the rest of it?
We just did my first Georgian wine since I've been here. It's called Lost Edens. It's got a little residual sugar, natural residual sugar. It's done very well. People really like it. It's a really cool bottle. Sometimes it's hard to know whether these things are trends. Certainly Georgian wine is not a trend because it's been around for thousands of years, but things like Pet Nat, which is naturally pétillant wines. Some of them even have like beer cap closures.
Pétillant naturel or something, the
Right,
ancestral method, lightly frizzy or whatever, not as fully sparkling. Yeah.
Biodynamic wines are becoming popular. Organic wines are popular, but here's my opinion of them. I don't want to suffer through a glass of wine because I think I'm doing myself a favor because it's biodynamic. There's no reason in the world, and biodynamic means that it's organic farming, but it also includes the cycles of the sun and the moon for planting and picking and storage and other things. But I don't want to have it taste like hay because it's so natural. I want it to taste good, and there's no reason why it shouldn't taste good. I personally have not read anything valuable health-wise necessarily, except that maybe it aligns our bodies with, the molecules of the earth. I mean, that's kind of what the attitude is. And the one defense of that thing like biodynamic that I've ever heard is from Piero Incenza in Patagonia from Bodega Chakra. And he said this once. He goes, if the moon can move the bodies of the ocean, which man could never do, and your body is 90% water, imagine what that gravitational pull is doing to your health. And I thought that was thought-provoking comment.
Interesting. And poetic, too.
His wines are great. They're biodynamic. They have a wonderful liveliness about them. And I will say true organic wines, not wines just made from organic grapes, but they're organic throughout the process, have a liveliness about them. I want them to taste good, though. I mean, I don't want to...
Yeah. Why do so many don't? They're freaky or funky or whatever, and like even natural and raw wines. I mean, they're hot and trendy and on restaurant lists, but often they're just so not good.
Tastes like hay.
Yeah.
Like
what's happening? Why are they? Is it because of lack of preservatives like sulfites, or what's going on with these wines?
No, organic wines in America, you can add sulfites. You can't in Europe, but you can add them here. Sulfites are natural too. I don't buy that argument. Most conventional winemakers would say,
even if you don't add them.
Right. And so one of the things you typically hear too, but when winemakers used to come to America before COVID, one of the most poignant things told me it was by Valentino Valentini. Imagine that name. Should be in the movies, right?
Yes.
Valentino Valentini. He was the mayor of Montefalco and he grows Sagrantino. And he says, my kids are playing in that vineyard. I don't want them dusted with pesticides. And that was a very poignant thing. And I think that's pretty normal, actually, in most parts of the world. We just didn't take time to worry about certifying them as organic. Many wines I get in here are organic by trade, but not certified. They don't go through the legal bureaucratic process to call it organic, but they only do it because they want to do it. And I don't know the reason. It takes 3 years to certify your winery as organic or biodynamic. And then I think you start over learning what that soil is going to do and produce in grapes, and it takes time. And to highlight that, Michel Rolanto, a friend of mine in Armenia, he goes, okay, I agree with you. You can grow grapes here and you can make wonderful wine, but it's going to take you 100 years to figure it out. So and she's like, 100 years? I'm only 35 years old. It's impossible.
I'm optimistic in the long term, though, really long term.
But the point of that is to learn how all the different seasons and all the different things that impact how a grape grows and how deep the roots are going to go and all the rest of the things that go into making a glass of wine are unknown.
Yeah. Well, and you only get one chance every year to accumulate all that learning. With beer, you're making a batch every 6 weeks or whatever. But with wine, it's like once a year, and then you document and you learn. But it is a slow process.
That's right.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Paul Kay. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, Paul offered some great tips on how to choose a wine club, as well as a good local wine retailer. Both of these can help you with the curation process in choosing great wines and getting to know your palate. 2, I agree with Paul in how to develop your wine vocabulary. Smell and taste everything. Well, almost everything. And 3, it's interesting to see how COVID has dramatically changed the wine business, from the volume of business done online these days to what's changing in terms of popular styles, regions, and price points. I also liked his suggestions for undervalued regions and vintages. You can win a personally signed copy of Rex Pickett's novel Sideways that was made into the hit movie, as well as a bottle of Sideways Pinot Noir if you comment on the social media post I created about the contest. Just pick your favorite platform, Insta, Facebook, or Twitter, and comment on the post I created before 7 p.m. on April 21st. I'll select the winner randomly from those of you who participate. You get a bonus entry if you tag a wine-loving friend or reshare it in your stories. In the show notes, you'll find a link to these posts, the full transcript of our conversation, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, where you can find me on Zoom, Insta, Facebook, and YouTube, live on video every Wednesday at 7, including this evening and next week. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/124. You won't want to miss next week when I continue this fascinating conversation with Paul Kay. In the meantime, if you missed the last 2 episodes about wine in the White House, go back and take a listen to them. There's lots of wine tips in there as I talk with Fred Ryan, publisher of the Washington Post. He's got some great stories on the intersection between wine and politics. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
This was in 1987, and the Prime Minister of France, Jacques Chirac, and his wife had come to the White House. Chirac and Reagan had been friends for many years. Chirac had been the mayor of Paris, and Reagan's governor of California, so they knew each other well, and they had shared wine together. And now here they are, the respective leaders of their 2 countries, and Chirac is coming to the White House. Here's France, the world's wine superpower, coming. So you had to do something that balanced that with the desire of American presidents to showcase the best in American wine. So Ronald Reagan came up with a very diplomatic solution. He served Opus One, the joint venture between Philippe de Rothschild of Chateau Mouton Rothschild and Robert Mondavi, a joint Franco-American venture, and it was the perfect wine, and it was very well received that evening.
Perfect blend. Blended diplomacy. Very nice. If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the tips that Paul shared. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.